Kathy Crop, our Public Affairs Officer from Army Environmental Command, will do roll call so we all understand who's here in the room and who is online. So thank you, Kathy.
Is in the room. Luke Lampall from WDNR, are you in the room? Here. And I can't hear them, Matt, so you're just going to have to tell me if
Sure.
they say no.
Present, yeah.
Curtis Hedman.
Here.
Present.
Randy Poema.
Yes, I'm here. Good evening, everyone.
Dennis Hancock.
Here.
Anyone from Sauk County Health Department?
Not in the room.
Valerie McCullough from Sauk County Board.
Not in the room.
Robin Meyer.
Present in the room.
Marla Steele.
Not in the room.
Laura Ola.
Present online.
Alderman Ellington.
Not present in the room.
Craig Walsh.
Present in the room.
Roger Heinrich.
Present in the room.
Michelle Hopp, already heard her. Doug Jerkson.
Present in the room.
Is there a representative from the village of Prairie du Sac?
Not,
Dr. Sullivan. Mike Gleason.
present in the room.
Chris Hansen.
Present in the room.
Barry Carroll Solom. Bill Sailing. Barry Wilhelm.
Present in the room.
Mary Jane Cock. Ken Lins. And then I see online we have Brenda Murphy, Dave Considine, Jason Lowry from DNR, Matt Krajowski from USGS, Juan from EEC, Sergio Celis, is that ERG?
Yes.
And T. Jackson as a guest. Is there anyone in the room who wasn't called?
Yes, ma'am.
Wendy Carlson, alternate with C-SWAB.
Gotcha, Wendy. Anyone else?
So Isaac Ross with WDNR. Joel Jansen with Spec Pro.
I always forget Joel, sorry.
Thanks, Kathy.
And then we've got a number of folks from USGS, Meg Hasterot, Howard Reeves, and you guys are going to have to remind me your names. Laura Schachter, Nick Korsendosh, Ryan Teft,
Did you catch the last one?
Nick Korsendosh, and then Ryan Teft from Omaha District, Dwight Holland from Army Environmental Command. And ma'am, I'm sorry, we didn't catch your name? Annette Crisco, community representative. And I think that is it. Did we miss anybody else?
Okay, I'll send that to Kay so she can add it to the minutes.
All right, thanks very much, Kathy and Kay. Appreciate it. So Since I jumped ahead of myself, we'll go back to the review of the meeting minutes from the January RAB. Again, we received comments from CSWAB. We've addressed those comments and made amendments to the minutes. Those were sent out with the presentations last Friday. So any other comments or questions on the minutes from January? All right. I think the operating procedures do not require us to vote on them, but we'll consider those finalized going forward and add those to the administrative record. So thank you all for that. So we'll go to our next slide. So this was a topic that Michelle asked us to speak on tonight, and it's a review of our installation action plan process. This is an annual process that the Army is required to complete per Department of Defense, and basically it's the output is a document, and link below you can go out and look at the FY22 installation action plan, and there's been one annually every year, but this essentially lays out site by site kind of a historical review of each site. It has a schedule in it per the CERCLA process, so it walks. It has a schedule that it shows a start and end date for each phase of the CERCLA process. So, starting with the preliminary assessment all the way through completion and closeout of a site. And again, this is an annual process. There's a secondary piece to this that we call our cost to completes. So every year DoD has to prepare an annual report to Congress which captures the Army and DoD as a whole's environmental liability across the spectrum. So we, as part of this process, we complete cost estimates for every site that is still open at every installation across the Army. And those sites, those costs are captured and rolled up. They are put before an auditor, and an auditor then assesses and evaluates those costs and then comes back to us with any questions they have. We have to validate every cost that we input into the system. So there's a piece of it that is available to the public. That's the phase schedules, the planning, the historical record. The cost piece, because contractors bid on our work, that is not available to the public, but just for awareness sake, that does happen as part of this process. So we're midstream in the process for fiscal year 23. So we have updated our installation action plan and prepared that. Right now we have submitted our initial costs to the auditors for review. We will answer questions over the month of May and then get those all complete and wrapped up. And then by the end of June, those costs are entered into what we call a database of record, and then those are captured there along with the phase schedules and any progress, and those are the metrics which we're evaluated against. So if we say we're going to complete a phase, that's entered into the system, and then we're held accountable for that. So that's kind of the accountability metric of it, and then at the end of the fiscal year, all installation action plans are uploaded to the website and issued for public review. So any questions on that while we talk about installation action plans? And again, you can see they don't change a whole lot from year to year, obviously. The CERCLA process, most phases take a few years to complete. So FY22 will probably give you a good sense of where we're at. And then this year we'll have updated it to capture any changes that have occurred over the last 6 to 9 months. Yes, sir, Mr. Hanson.
Yeah, just the acronym NLT, what is that?
No later than.
No later.
Yes, sir. So that's kind of the due date. The question was, what does the acronym NLT stand for? And that's no later than in the chart.
Okay, and just so I understand, this is collectively all the actions that are going on in installation that are still open.
Yes, sir. This is all actions that are, the question was, sorry, I'm trying to remember to repeat for the folks online. So the question was, this is all collective actions for an installation. So yes, any environmental liability for an installation. So it could be, there's a couple of different funding sources. For Badger, it is solely the Defense Environmental Restoration Program. We also have a different program for overseas installations, which is called compliance cleanup, because we're not allowed to use DERP dollars for overseas installations. So, but yes, it captures all environmental liabilities for every installation across the footprint, and then that gets wrapped up into the DoD's financial statement at the end of the year, and that's shown as a liability. But I do encourage you, and you can reach out to us anytime with questions on the installation action plan. Again, it's a bit technical because it does use the circle of phasing and process, but it does lay out, and you can see exactly where we're at. It should match exactly what we're telling you in these RAB meetings, but you can go out there and read that for yourself. And the benefit that I find in it's a good historical summary of what has taken place to date. So over the last 20, some of these sites have been around for 30 plus years. So it's a good summary of what's taken place from an investigation standpoint, any previous actions taken place. Some of the sites have had an action implemented, and so we're in a 30-year monitoring period that continues to roll. So for instance, the landfills at Badger Army Ammunition Plant, we monitor those into perpetuity. DOD requires us to capture those in 30-year increments. So every year, we bump it out a year. So we're capturing the cost for the next 30 years, and that's just a artifact of the way the cost accounting happens. But it gives you a good idea of what's occurred, what's still to come, and what we're planning from a phase schedule standpoint. Does anybody else have any questions, any online questions about installation action plans? But Michelle, thanks for bringing that up, and that's a key topic and something we should probably talk about a little bit more often, and I think it's a great document that folks in the public can use for a resource.
I thought it really interesting to read, and so it's got, like he said, it's a wealth of history. And so if you ever want a refresher on everything that's happened in Badger, it's a good place to go.
So the next topic tonight is just a quick update on where we are with the installation of 8 new monitoring wells. We briefed this last time. WDNR had approved our work plan for installation of the new wells, and so we've been engaged with the 4 property owners where the wells will be installed. One of those is a private landowner, so we didn't specifically put their name here, but the other 3 are entities which we can specifically list, and so you can see those there. So conversations have been had with those parties. All are amenable to installation of those wells, and so right now, I think as we've discussed before, the Army Corps of Engineers is the real estate function for the Army, and so a real property access agreement has to be implemented and signed and agreed to between the resident and or the government entity that owns the property and the Army, and that sometimes we do pay lease fees for these wells as well. So that's all being worked right now in the final terms of those, and we're on target to begin installation of those wells in late spring, early summer. So it'll depend a little bit on when those final negotiations are all complete and real estate agreements are in place. But that's an update on where we're at based on our discussion last time. Yes, Joel.
You want to mention that the DOT one is already approved?
Yes. So if you didn't hear that online, Joel said the DOT has already approved an access agreement, and they've given us a window of May 15th to June 15th to install that well. So Spec Pro has gotten that permit, and so we're trending towards that date. We'd like to do it all in one mobilization, and so get all these properties wells installed in sequence. So we'll continue to trend toward that. And the next slide, just as a reminder, and this was briefed last time, kind of a general depiction of where these wells are. Some of them are well nests, so you'll have several different wells at different depths in one location. Again, a total of eight different wells. So you can see there in the propellant burning ground, mostly on the southern portion of the plume, and the deterrent burning ground, the far eastern portion of the plume. So we will get those installed and hopefully have data from those, to fill in some of our data gaps on exactly where these plumes are moving and who they're impacting here in the near future. So a few project management updates that we've been discussing. So the groundwater site-wide proposed plan that's been under work for quite some time. We briefed last time that we'd gotten Army legal approval late last year. We made final tweaks to that and submitted that to WDNR in February, and we met with them today. They're nearing the end of their review and preparing to issue us comments on that. So the next step would be to resolve any comments from WDNR, ensure that they approve of or agree with the proposed remedy, and then we would hold a public comment meeting and allow kind of a in-depth discussion of the proposed remedy, and then Circular requires a 30-day public comment period where written comments can be submitted. As Michelle has requested in the past, to extend that to 60 days, we're certainly amenable to that. And so there'll be a public notice for that, and then we'll hold a public meeting. So as soon as we resolve any and all comments with WDNR, we will issue that to the public and then notify everyone of a public meeting. Yes, sir.
So what will the DNR review? Are they going to look at it with their scientists and say this makes sense and it will work?
So the question was, what would WDNR be reviewing? Are they reviewing it with their scientists to make sure that the remedy would work? And the general answer is yes. I don't want to speak for WDNR, but yeah, they're looking at it from all aspects.
Yeah, so we have typically for any site, we have a project manager that's assigned to the site, so that's Luke, so he's kind of the site expert for that. And then in addition to that, we have certain teams, and we'll probably talk about multiple of them throughout the course today, but one of those teams is our complex site team. So we've engaged them, so I think there's 3 or 4 people on that group from various backgrounds, as well as Luke's expertise. And then what we can also do on occasion is bring it to regional peer reviews too, if there are questions that we need to iron out. So right now we've met with Luke, we've met with our complex site team, talked about those. We have our general ideas of what we'd like to express back to the to the Army rather. And generally, it's, do we agree with these approaches? Are there data gaps that we're concerned about? Are there approaches that we'd like to have a little bit more information to make sure that that's applicable? And so then we'll be providing those comments back to the Army, and then, like he had said, we'll take that and either incorporate them and then give it out back to the group. So that's typically what it looks like for any site, but then the specific teams that are working on the project for this site in specific.
Laura is asking if you can talk a little bit more about the chemicals that will be utilized.
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit premature. We'll go definitely into depth on that during the proposed plan public meeting. I think we want to hold off on that until WDNR has had their look at it from a chemical perspective. But essentially, it's largely vegetable oil that's used in these type of processes. And the intent, if you will, and I'm not an expert on this, but is to promote microbic growth in the groundwater system. It feeds on the vegetable oil, but then would in turn then feed on the DNT and the VOCs in the groundwater and kind of eat up that, if you will, for lack of a better term, eat up that contamination. We have a long way to go from a design perspective on spacing and where exactly those injections will occur, what the residence time is, what the influence area is. So that's something we discussed with the WDNR today. They're very interested in all of that dynamic. At this point, we're just deciding on what the remedy is, and then we'll enter into the next phase after a decision document is signed that will really flesh out in full detail what the actual design of that remedy will look like. And we'll likely be doing some studies some bench scale type studies to make sure it works, to understand exactly how we need to implement this, and then move forward with a full scale operation to implement. So hopefully that helped. Mr. Hanson, yes, sir.
Well, I've got several questions on this. I guess the first one is, when we first heard about this approach, it was in the RIFS. And, it was about 2 paragraphs and 218 pages. And so there really wasn't much information there. And we've not had a discussion within the RAB about this. And this clearly seems to be the preferred approach that the Army is taking.
Yes, sir.
Is there going to be an opportunity for the RAB to have a discussion with the Army about this?
Yes, sir.
Or is this going to be just part of the public input process? I got probably several dozen questions about this myself.
Sure.
And so I'm just wondering, process-wise, is the RAB going to have an opportunity? And then secondly, it seems that the decision has effectively been made here, so it brings me to the question of what can the public give you that would change anything? It seems just like it's just part of the process and it's not necessarily going to change any decision-making.
So for those online who didn't hear, Mr. Hansen's question was essentially what's going to be the RAB's portion of this process or input into this process, and has the decision already essentially been made, and can anything be done to influence that decision? So again, the circle process is the public participation piece is the proposed plan process. So the Army actually doesn't sign a decision document until the proposed plan is complete, done, and signed. And so the decision document allocates the resources and the requirements and the directive to move forward. So we'll talk about this on the next slide, but as requested, the RAB has been given a TAP grant. And we have now a contractor on hand to support that, technical assistance for public participation. So the RAB can certainly leverage that resource to help them understand and evaluate and make comments on this process. But our intent is not to force feed this. It's to legitimately seek public input and move through the process.
Well, I understand that's part of the process, but it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Yeah.
I guess my third issue here is the taxpayer.
Yes, sir.
And that is, how effective is this? And I did some research online, and I can find a lot of information out there that's, talks about it in the Vados area above the water table, and the Weldon Springs project, and one down in Chattanooga that the Army and the military has been involved in, a number of them. They've been very effective in the lab and in some small situations on site, but in terms of groundwater effectiveness on a large scale, I couldn't find any information. A lot of this information that's out there is 20 years old in terms of research papers and so forth. So,
Sure.
My question is the effectiveness of it, committing tax dollars to it.
Absolutely.
Where are we headed with that? Is this, in fact, the best approach, and are there true, real-life exampes that it's been effective?
Right. So for those online, if you didn't hear that, Mr. Hansen basically asked, has this technology been proven to work, and do we have examples of that? Personally speaking, I've worked on 2 sites that we've implemented this, one at McAllister Army Ammunition Plant, where we had VOCs moving towards Brown Lake, which is their groundwater drinking, or their drinking water source. It's not groundwater, I'm sorry. But it does feed into the lake and we established hurdles, we called them hurdles at the time, and did injections, and as the water moved toward the lake, that microbial material did significantly reduce the contaminants. Dwight and Ryan work at Cornhusker Army Ammunition Plant in Nebraska, where the same thing's been implemented and been very, very effective. So, and I know I can think of a couple more probably, and I'm sure I don't even know them all, but I think we can certainly provide more information as to where it's been successful. We have reports that talk about the success and the magnitude of contamination decreases that we've seen over time. But and certainly, I mean, yes, I mean it is these things are complicated problems, and part of the reason we would do some pilot studies, some bench scale studies, is to ensure and prove out this is going to work for this specific site with this geological formation with these specific contaminants before we go out and punch holes for miles and miles. Certainly we would want to be sure that it works. It has been proven other places, and so that's why it was proposed as a potential remedy, and it's been very effective. So yes, sir, as we move forward, all those things will be considered. nothing's foolproof, certainly, and we completely understand that we've got to, walk through this in a smart, technical manner and seek all input and feedback to make sure we're being good stewards of the taxpayer dollar and trying to get this site cleaned up as quickly and completely as possible.
Matt,
Yes.
we did an article about a year ago about Cornhusker that talked about how it worked there and the dollars and time saved. We can send that out to the RAB members.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you for that. Yes, Michelle.
And at McAllister, the problem was VOCs, so
Yes.
we're pretty sure that it'll work on that. At Cornhusker, was it DNT? What were the contaminants?
I believe it was TNT largely.
So TNT?
Yeah.
Okay, right. So a little different.
A little bit different, right?
Both are explosives.
Right. Okay, thank you for that. And I'm glad that you were the expert.
So that's where we are. And again, if the public needs more time to review and consider this proposed plan, we certainly can be amenable and flexible to that. We'll have the in-depth public meeting, and we'll have the public comment period, which will be an extended 60 days. But certainly, as we walk through that process, if there's any need for information or to talk more about it, yes, Mr. Heinrich.
A problem with the public comment.
Okay.
You guys, the Army has spent years with lots of experts analyzing this, and then it gets turned over for public comment for 30 or 60 days. It almost seems like we as the public, in order to really understand this, would have to spend an inordinate amount of money and time to evaluate that from perhaps a different angle, than where the Army's come from. So it almost seems to me, what Chris is saying, that this public comment is just for show.
The public comment is part of the law. I mean, that's what I can specifically state. It is part of the CERCLA statute, and so we're required to do it. And you're right. I mean, it's certainly a lot of effort, time, and money is spent on investigating these sites, developing potential remedial actions. I mean, this is obviously what we do for a day job, and you guys have different day jobs and can't spend the time or resources to be a part of that. I guess I don't have a good answer for your question.
Dave Considine was on the line, who is our state representative. Perhaps you could say that the RAB would like to request that the state be involved. Ask him if he could come up with any money or anything like that to help us out.
I'm not sure I understand. Like involved from other than a WDNR perspective, or?
I don't know who this guy is that we've hired.
Oh, that they've hired.
Well, okay, that they hired.
Yeah, they
It's kind
hired.
of fishy to me to begin with. But I kind of thought he might be here tonight.
Oh, and I don't know. They're in charge of him. And then they'll let us talk to him once this groundwater proposal is approved by the DNRs. That's my understanding.
Well, actually, our intent tonight was to introduce this gentleman's name. The contract has been awarded to him. We're certainly not going to be the conduit. You guys can talk directly to him, but we will we will connect those pieces, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. And then you guys, essentially, the program allows for $25,000 a year in support, and you guys can leverage him to evaluate this, sit with you, talk about it, punch holes in it, if you will, and really just evaluate what you think from your perspective, and then provide feedback to the Army through that process.
Matt, if I could make a comment.
Mm-hmm.
So on the public comment period, the intent is not for the public to provide technical information, but to provide public concerns and public information. So for instance, if we have this plan and we say we want to put these injections at this location, this location, this location, and this location, but based on your experience living in that area, that maybe that area gets flooded a lot, or maybe you know something else that happens in that area that the Army isn't aware of. Those are the kind of feedback that we get from the public that is very useful to the Army and helps us make informed decisions, not from a technical standpoint, as much as it is from understanding the community and what happens in that community on a cyclical or even a day-to-day basis. So that's what the public part of the process is. It's not the technical review. You can get assistance for the technical review through TAP, but it's really the community's understanding of what happens in that community at these locations we're proposing to take action on. You can help us better understand that, if that makes sense.
So unless we as a RAB act on our own and hire an engineering firm or engineering person independently of this TAP person, we really have no say in what's going on.
Well, we have a say, but we may not have the knowledge.
Well, we don't have the knowledge. we
Right.
don't-
So the thing is, what I can just say from my experience here is that our last TAP consultant from USGS was helpful because he found stuff that he didn't agree with. I don't know if you remember that, but it was very helpful. And so that's better than what we could do on our own. So I would say, let's try it again and see what we can come up with. And it is the way it is. It's the law. So let's make the most of it. I think we probably have a good consultant, and
Can you go to the next slide?
yeah, then we can look at that.
Yeah, I
Because
will.
we're-
I
Yes,
just
ma'am.
wanted to comment that I believe you gave us the opportunity, if we knew of somebody who
Yes.
would be suitable as a TAP consultant, we should provide that, and nobody came up with anything.
That is correct. And I would say, the Army, it's in the Army's interest to do this right and do this well, right? I mean, obviously you guys have been living this, I understand that, for many, many years, and a lot of things haven't been done correctly. But we can't walk away from this site until this is cleaned up. And so it's certainly not in our best interest, and certainly not in your best interest for us to pick a technology that's not going to work or something that's not optimal. Our interests are in getting this cleaned up. Finances are largely not an issue. So our DERP funded account is a very well funded account. Congress has given us plus ups the last several years. So we're certainly not hurting for cash. So our intent is to do right and to move this forward. As with anything, this is groundwater that's at depth, and there's a lot going on down there that is complicated and we don't exactly understand all the time. So some of it is a little bit of trial and error and trying to figure out where we're poking the holes is correct or not. But our intent is to move this forward and address the problem and get a resolution. I don't know if that makes you feel any better, but and we'll talk about the TAP here in a second. I did want to hit on the second 5-year review that's underway for Badger Army Ammunition Plant. So 5-year reviews look at remedies that have been implemented. So this is not for sites where we haven't implemented a remedial action. This is where we've implemented a remedial action and we're evaluating the protectiveness and effectiveness of those remedies. So every 5 years, per the law, we take a step back and we hire a third-party consultant to come in and look at what we've done and ensure that it's still protective of human health and the environment. So a site visit was conducted in mid-March for that consultant to come out and look at the sites and get familiar with it. They've gotten all the historical documentation, and so they're drafting their technical review of where we're at and whether those remedies are meeting the intended goals. And so we're looking forward to having a draft of that report here soon, and then working through the process along with WDNR to evaluate that, implement any required corrective actions from that, and then finalizing that here towards the end of this fiscal year. So that is the second 5-year review. And then I think, as you're all aware, we've talked about a couple of times, we're updating the community involvement plan. So we just received a draft of that community involvement plan. We didn't get a lot of feedback from the community. I think we posted notices at the library. We requested folks to give us input at the last RAB, and we had some contact information available, so we didn't get much there. So I would say that if you have, this is how we communicate with you all and what works best, whether that be social media, whether that be in-person meetings, all of those things. And so if you have input on that, please reach out to us and we'll make sure that that's incorporated into the community involvement plan. We'll be looking at that, and certainly we'll share that with you all here in the near future. So any questions on the second 5-year review or the community involvement plan?
Have the deadlines been met for both of those, or is no longer open for public comment?
So the second 5-year review will be issued, so there's no public comment period per se. There'll be a public notice that the 5-year review is complete and is available for review. The community involvement plan, we did kind of miss that window, but again, it's your plan, so it wouldn't be wise to say that's completely ended. If you all have input or things we need to consider, we could certainly, we're still in a draft phase now and would love to have input and feedback and can incorporate that before we finalize that document. Did I miss one? Okay, maybe the tap's on the next one. I'm sorry. So we'll get to that one. Or maybe we can just go to it since it's kind of, and then we'll circle back. So the top item on this, I'm sorry, did somebody?
This is Laura, my hand is raised.
Oh.
When these documents are published, like the 5-year review and installation action plan, can they be sent to the RAB members? Because I think it's fair to say, I think I noticed one of the notices, but I don't think most of us were aware. And that would really be helpful to us, because I don't subscribe to the papers that you mentioned.
Okay. Yeah, I think we could certainly send that.
We can put it on the website and then send the link out to all the RAB members.
Yes, thanks, Kathy. Perfect.
That'd be great, thank you.
So we'll talk briefly on the TAP, and we'll go back. So again, we've been working on this and honestly had a hard time trying to find a consultant that was interested in taking on the work. But luckily, Joel knew of Mr. Jim Tingham out of the University of Wisconsin, and so through our ERG contract, reached out to him, and he was interested in doing the work. So that contract has been awarded. So he is your TAP consultant. We'll make sure Michelle has his contact information and put those two in contact, and then you guys can step through the process as to what you guys want him specifically to look at, and then engage with him as needed. We are limited to a $25,000 a year budget, but he is retained. His services are retained for support to the RAB. So, yes, Robin.
So then this group could call a separate meeting just to meet with him.
Sure.
That is strictly for the purposes of his consultation.
Right. So Robin asked if the RAB could have a set-aside meeting with the TAP consultant just themselves, and certainly that's within the parameters of the program for sure. Yes, ma'am.
U.S. GS TAP representative, and it was very productive.
Yeah, it was.
And just so you guys know, Jim has been to the site before. He's gotten a tour, and his students learn about engineering, environmental work. So that's one of his specialties. And so he's well aware of what's going on and has been a private consultant in the past for companies. So he is very familiar with a lot of these issues.
All right, so going back a slide here, sorry for those online. So we're taking a step back. So to continue our contracting action updates for fiscal year 23. So we've been talking about the settling pond, expanded site investigation, and you can see the areas there that are included. So a couple of months ago, we submitted that to our contracting office. We've scoped it. We've done all the technical work leading up to an acquisition. We've prepared cost estimates. It is currently with our Mission Installation Contracting Command office at Fort Sam, Houston. The next phase for them is they've got to go through certain hoops, go through the Small Business Administration, do a kind of a market research that they're required to do from their end. The They will then issue a request for proposal to SpecPro. SpecPro will prepare a proposal, and we'll review that from the Army perspective and evaluate costs as well, and then award that contract here in the near future. So getting close to that. So we're looking at probably a late spring award here for that, and then we will move forward with developing work plans, which you will all see, and we'll share those as we move through the process here at the next RAB meeting, and then begin the site inspection at those areas, and then it will also pull together a comprehensive site-wide groundwater monitoring plan, which we do not have now, and I think is something we're lacking. So it will be a comprehensive document that talks about what wells are sampled and when, on what frequency, for what analytes, and so it will be kind of our Bible, if you will, for groundwater monitoring at the site, and that will be a living document going forward as we optimize and the program evolves. It'll capture new wells, it'll capture changes in frequency of sampling, et cetera. So, and that'll be coordinated. All these things will be coordinated with WDNR, obviously, and shared with you all. So that's one contract action. A second contract action. So as you all know, we've had some kind of evolution of the PFAS world over the last year. So we had initially done a preliminary assessment and site inspection at Badger for PFAS. The initial conclusion was that there was no further action. There was no PFAS releases exceeding screening criteria at Badger. EPA has been and continues to be in the process of promulgating rules for PFAS. So last summer, they issued revised screening levels. DOD did adopt those revised screening levels, and that's, I think we briefed you guys at the October RAB that one site, the propellant burning ground, was then brought off the no further action list and moved forward to a remedial investigation at Badger. So that's where we are now. EPA is issued preliminary standards or draft standards in late March, largely for PFOS and PFOA of 4 parts per trillion. And so those, they're in a couple, they've got to be promulgated. Public comment, I think, is still ongoing. And so we anticipate those to be likely the law here in about a year. But regardless, we're moving forward with a remedial investigation at the propellant burning ground. We're working a contract for that will be awarded in FY24 for PFAS at Badger. And it looks like we have a question online.
Laura has a question. Laura, go ahead.
This is Laura. My question is, I was thinking about PFAS at the propellant burning grounds, and the same activity occurred at the deterrent burning grounds, and PFAS is just not associated with the HJJAfF, the aqueous film-forming foam. It's associated with landfills and a whole laundry list that I won't bore you with. I have a question, if you could get back to us at the next meeting. First of all, I think there should be testing for PFAS. And the reason is I would like to understand if it is present, if it could have any effect on the remedy. I'm thinking not, but I think we need to ask that question.
I'm sorry, Laura, if it's present where? I'm not sure.
At the deterrent burning ground.
At the
northeast
DB,
corner.
okay. All right. Yeah, we certainly, I'll have to dig up the numbers. I'm pretty sure we tested that during the SI, and it did not exceed screening criteria, but we can certainly get back to you with the numbers on that. Yeah, and as you said, PFAS is persistent in our environment. They just recently came out and said it's in toilet paper. I mean, it's in absolutely everything we use. So we're obviously the screening criteria and the drinking water MCL that EPA is working on are super low numbers. So 4 parts per trillion is very, very low. But so what I would say is there's probably going to be multiple bites at the apple on this thing as this evolves. Obviously, we've seen it go from 70 parts per trillion. Now we're looking at 4. So, and that's just over the last couple of years. So just because we say today that it's not an issue doesn't mean that it won't come back around again. And as the science on this progresses and labs catch up with what they're able to detect in samples, things like that. But at this point, per DOD guidance, the one site we are moving forward with is the propellant burning ground. And, we'll add and navigate those changes as they come down the road. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the initial screening investigation of this. Is there plans to do that again, to repeat it at some point in the future, or is it just the once and that's it?
At this point, I think we would use those numbers. So as the numbers decrease and the standards decrease, we would go back to those numbers from that initial inspection and leverage those numbers. The only way I could see us going back is if we didn't look at certain areas. So if we became aware of a potential release site that we have not sampled, we would then go back and look at that site. And that's through historical records, that's through interviews, and all that was done during the initial process, but obviously it's not a foolproof process. So as things evolve and if new information comes to light, we would then, yes, go back and take a look at those specific sites. But otherwise, we would rely on the numbers that we've already collected.
We do plan on annually testing our well that we will be using for livestock.
Okay.
If it's, it starts showing up, obviously we're going to be testing a lot more frequently.
Sure. Yeah, all Army installations right now are in that same wicket. Army installations obviously serve large populations, and so right now, I think, we've got about 58 Army installations that, with this new standard change, are going to have issues with drinking water for the residents on those installations. So yeah, it's a huge problem. It's got a huge financial price tag to it, and so yeah, I think typically EPA gives a 3 to 4 year compliance window. So depending on when they establish the MCL, we'll have 3 or 4 years to ensure that everybody's drinking clean water. But unfortunately, these things don't happen overnight, and it takes systems and treatment, and a lot goes into it, digging new wells potentially. So it's a complicated problem that is going to cost quite a bit of money to fix, but certainly we want to ensure that we're in compliance and folks are safe. And then last one, I think we've briefly touched on this one in the past as well. So we're modifying the current Spec Pro contract to complete some repairs on landfill 5, largely from settling. We were out there today actually, and with the rain you could see pretty easily where we've got settlement issues and water ponding. So we're going to leverage the Spec Pro contract to get after bringing in some fill and contouring that landfill to ensure that we don't have infiltration and water sitting on top of that landfill. So that is in process. That is also with our MIC office and just waiting on a bid and award. So we've got money set aside for these actions. Go ahead, Kathy.
Before I hadn't seen it, Laura asked, when would we like comments on the 5-year review? I didn't know if you had a timeline for where they were in the process.
No, right now we haven't even seen the draft. I'd say we would, once we get the draft, we'll be more comfortable with where we're at, and then we'll get that information out to the public. So at this time, it's probably a little premature to guess based on when we receive that document. And then finally, so we've talked about the TAP. I think it was last August, we had the story map presentation, which I think a lot of folks really appreciated and thought was a good tool. And so the RAB asked if we could do a better job of promoting that to the public and allowing folks, making folks aware of that tool. So an article has been prepared. I don't think, Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's been published. But I know a couple of RAB members have been interviewed about the usefulness of that tool and just to try to promote it. So I think any day now we'll have, go ahead.
I'm going to send it to the RAB members who participated for their review to make sure we got their quotes right. I had just received it back from USGS review and made their edits, and so it'll probably go out tonight
and then
to the RAB members.
Thanks, Kathy. And then we'll get that published and hopefully drum up some interest in that story map and that tool that's available. Yes, sir.
I guess this kind of goes back to the community involvement plan, and putting together plans is nice, but it's what you actually do that matters. And we asked for this last August 4th meeting, And here it is, 7 months later, and we were just talking about getting some news releases out to the typical locations in the Madison, greater Sauk area. And here we've got an article, and it's more review. I mean, you're talking about a community involvement plan, but my gosh, if it's going to take this long to do a simple news release, and the question is, okay, we have an article to publish. How are we going to get that out? How is that going to be dispensed to the general public? Because it is just an article that gets put someplace on the back page. It's not going to do any good.
Right. Well, and I think that's the feedback we need from you all. How do you all receive news? How do you all receive information? So we're going to publish it through the Army.mil. We'll put it on the website. Army Environmental Command has a Twitter page now. I don't know if that's something you all use. So we need feedback on how you guys receive information, what's useful to you as community members, what you hear from your fellow community members.
And we can provide the URL to the article so that RAB members can send it to whoever is in their circle of people that they want to keep informed so that they can share it that way.
But putting it on your website, I literally just Googled your website, and it finally worked. Well, no, since Monday, I've been trying this every day, and you get one of those error 404 messages. And I've been complaining about this since 2013, that the general public has a hard time accessing, and there's been, we're going to fix this, we're going to fix that, but just putting it on the military website, if people can't get to it, I don't know why it's so hard for the general public to get into a military website that's supposed to be external. But that's been an issue for many, many years.
And please remember that a large portion of these people don't have internet access yet or have adequate internet access. There is supposed to be a major project going to provide it to actually, I think, 4 townships right now, but that's not until 2026. So when we're doing this all on the internet, you've got a limited audience already.
Laura has her hand up now.
Okay. Go ahead, Laura.
Sorry, I was muted. I know for decisions that the DNR, if you're interested in certain activities or a site, they establish an interested parties letter or list and maintain that. So visiting the website periodically, which like Chris said, that's been going on for years. I'm all too familiar with the 404 message. Either that or you can get in and the text is so dark you can't read it. So that might be something we could do so that when a report is published or posted, that somehow that notice goes out to that list with a link. And then we can also, for people that don't have access, provide them with, especially if it's a big document, tell them where the library is, or if it's a smaller document, provide something in print. It's pretty easily done. I know they have to have internet, but to get the notices, but that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
And if I could,
Yes, Michelle.
just one piece of feedback. I know the database that the USGS used for what we're wanting to do this article about and send out, I believe it only goes up to 2018. So if we're going to be promoting it, this might be a good time for the Army to do a contract with USGS to get current data up there so that it looks more, I don't know, relevant.
Thanks, Michelle, for that.
Laura, do you have another question? Maybe your hand is just...
Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, she may be having issues. Okay, all right, thanks. At this time, I'll turn it over to Ryan Teff to give a brief update on the Groupers Grove Bay. Oh, looks like it's kind of cut off there, sorry. Contract. Let's see if I can.
I think if we can't make this work, then we'll just go on the normal PowerPoint view. We'll just go slide by slide. Should be fine. So I'll just exit out here. I think this was created in a wide view. But before I do that, I'll introduce myself. My name is Ryan Teft. I am the project manager for the Groupers Grove Bay Desktop Remedial Investigation Feasibility Study. I am out of the Army Corps U.S. Army Corps Omaha District. As the PM, I'm responsible for administrating the contract and making sure that we're on schedule and within our scope and budget. I'm doing this presentation on behalf of our contractor, AECOM, Dr. Taddy Bihara. Unfortunately, couldn't make it today. He is under the weather, but I should know enough to answer questions. If not, I will defer any kind of questions to the next RAB and where Dr. Bihara can be present. So the
Zoom in just a little bit.
Oh yeah, sure. That's probably good. Let me know when. Too much. There we go. Is that good for everyone? Okay, for those online, we were experiencing some minor technical difficulty. So on today's agenda, we'll go over total summary of the mercury data, sediment maps, we'll have a brief discussions, and we'll review next steps in this current contract. So what we can see here is a summary of sediment sample locations taken at various times throughout since this has been known to be a problem. Here is a sample legend that I'll try to zoom in on here. So these samples here are samples collected in 2018, and these samples here represented by just the black dot are samples collected in 2016. So this gives you a comprehensive view of all the most recent data sets. So on this slide here, we summarize total mercury data. Let me get it viewable for everyone. So altogether, we're analyzing 63 surface samples, 63 subsurface samples, areas within both areas within both sediment layers exceeding background. So we can see here represented in this table, we have some subsurface sampled minimum values of 0.0093. These are in milligrams per kilogram. Maximum 12.4, median in 0.25, and the upper confidence limit of 1.8. And then the surface samples are listed directly above there. Some of the key takeaways from this are those min and max values. The target goal is for background concentration is 0.36 milligrams per kilogram, so that's another important value to remember in this as we go through this presentation. So the maps were prepared for 2 sediment horizons based on the most complete sample data sets. The operating word there is complete. I think there's been some samples taken before 2016, but we wanted to look at complete data sets that are recent so that it will best represent the current conditions at site. So we defined surface as 0 to 5 feet, 0 to half a foot, and then subsurface as greater than half a foot below the surface. Here we have a graph that, well, really it's a figure that represents our overall model of what mercury looks like in the bay. So I don't know if you can see the legend down there, but we have 4 colors, dark blue all the way to red. Dark blue is less than that background remediation goal of 0.36 milligrams per kilogram. Light blue is 0.36 to 0.64 milligrams per kilogram. The light red is 0.64 to 1.1 milligrams per kilogram, and then dark red is greater than 1.1 milligrams per kilogram. Those values were chosen out of statistical relevance. We have a statistician that is working with us on this contract to best characterize the data. So those values really are just a statistical method. And then we get to the subsurface sediment. As we can see that there's a difference here, and we distinguish between those two depths for a reason. We can see that a lot of the mercury is represented in the surface sediment, the 0 to 0.5 feet, compared to the subsurface. So as you get deeper, the less concentrated values. There becomes less and less mercury as you go through the soil column. So I'll just flip through these a couple of times as we continue to talk about it. We can see that there's pretty good, there's good data as near the, right around there, and there. And that's important to point out too, because they represent different levels within the bay. It's kind of hard to see, but these lines right here are kind of, they're called topographic or bathymetric levels, so they'll represent you sloping down into the bay. Excuse me, sorry, I'm having a hard time zooming in and out with this. So we're using these values. Why is this important? You know, we're using these values and these graphs to come up with a detailed model to understand what the site conditions look like at Groupers Grove Bay and how we can progress the contract. What we've determined here is the sampling grid was limited along the margins of the sediment. This limited our ability to clearly identify boundaries for mercury at some locations in the bay. Existing sample data sets did not allow for accurate estimates for changes over time. So what we mean by that is, you know, they were just snapshotted in 2016, 2018. You know, we didn't have 2016, 17, 18, 19, all the way up until now, with just those two occurrences. So what we're doing is we're working through some next steps. We're looking at the next RAB to present human health and ecological risk assessment view. Dr. E. Bihar will be here to present that. That's above my level of understanding. We're going to review receptors in the conceptual site model. And importantly, we're going to be looking at exercising what's called a data gap investigation, where we're going to go look at some of the data quality and possibly look at getting additional samples at the site so that our model continues to reflect the current site conditions. And that will help us identify the remediation strategy that we will recommend the Army pursues for cleaning up the bay once and for all. So that's really the overarching goal of this contract, is to get this done once and for all. And that includes looking at all the historical data, collecting some additional samples and data in a data gap investigation, and using that in a modeling software so that we can recommend and identify the places where mercury is its highest, where it's lowest, and how we can best clean it up. Let's see. I'm sure there's going to be questions here. I will do my best to answer them. We will start with the lady in the back.
You say that you measure the subsurface from a half of a foot and deeper, so where actually do you measure it? How deep is it?
I believe it was at 4 feet. I don't... Oh, yes. The question was, how deep does subsurface go? We start at half a foot. How deep does it go? I believe the deepest sample was collected at 4.5 feet below the surface, but...
Foot and 4.5. at different intervals?
Yes, that is correct. Not, a previous contractor has done that. We can provide the RAB with the minimum and the maximum depth that we were sampled at. So we'll make that an action item to provide that for you. That's in the historical data.
4.5 feet down in some places?
It incrementally, it varies, but you know, the statistical model shows that most of it is at the surface, and then it will the concentration will decrease with depth.
Laura has a question online as well.
Okay, we'll go with the online question, and we'll get to the two gentlemen who raised their hand.
Thank you. Will the risk assessment, the health risk assessment, look at cumulative risk? I know the focus, the driver for the cleanup has been mercury, and that's gotten the most attention, but there's 15 or 20 other co-contaminants, cadmium, chromium, PCBs, etc. Will the health and risk to aquatic systems look at all the contaminants of concern?
Yes, yes, it will. And I'll add, we have a draft, an internal draft, RIFS, and in that risk assessment, we are looking at those chemicals of concern and how they relate to human health and to ecological health. So that is in the internal draft phase. We are almost at the finish line with that, and those findings in that report will be presented at the next RAB. Okay, we'll start with the gentleman in the red plaid.
When do you think you'll have all this information gathered together that you can make a recommendation to the Army on what they should do?
I believe after the data gap analysis, the data gap investigation. We can exercise the option, truthfully, fairly quickly. We have the money in-house. We have the ability to exercise it. It's important to note that that draft RIFS is going to make a recommendation on that, and we will be able to quickly mobilize awarding that. There will be, with any kind of field activity, there will be a work plan involved. We're going to have to make sure that we're doing it right, and we're going out and we're being safe, but there's a lot of historical precedent for sampling at this site, and I don't foresee any major institutional institutional barriers for us getting out there at the moment. I'm just going to hesitate to give you like 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, but it happens more quickly than like awarding a new task order. The gentleman in the, I forgot to repeat the question. I'm sorry. The question was how quickly could we make a recommendation? So that was my previous answer.
Let's go back to the two slides that you were flipping between.
Yes.
So, okay, the one with all the red on it.
Yes.
That is surface layer contamination, right?
Yes. The question is there's two slides. The one with the most red represents the 0 to half a foot samples that have been taken historically, and we consider those to be surface samples. You know, we have gone a lot over the color coding of these, and I think Dwight, the first time he saw this, was like, red bad. We definitely need to look at the color coding.
I mean, I'm okay with that, but my mind is telling me if they've already dredged the bay once or twice, why is the contamination worse at the surface than it is at the subsurface?
That's a very good question, and yes, the question is we've dredged the bay twice. Why is the contamination higher or more present at the surface rather than the subsurface? Did I summarize that? Okay. That's a very, I would say, complicated and complex question with complicated and complex answers that I don't think I have the answer for at the time.
new contamination coming in.
I would say that there is not a source, there is no active source of mercury continuing to contaminate the bay. Joel, I could jump in here.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we did the sampling, obviously, SPS in 2016 and 16. And so as we were looking at all the samples, the gelatinous material, which is a pudding-like black, very, very hard to capture material that you can't put your hand on. It's not dirt. It's very viscous and a lot of water, so it's easy to disturb. If you put your hand down there, you can move it around. That is the material near the surface that had the heavier mercury. So if you went back and look at one of those, like the 2018 sampling report, there was a lot of variability between showing where the mercury was related to this mud and where it was characterized, that you would find it usually where that material was found, that the mercury was higher. And so it is a stuff that sits where the water column, and then you can feel a difference where that really soft material is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one hypothesis as to why it's sitting on the surface is if you can visualize as you mechanically disturb the bottom of the bay, that light, fluffy material that Joel was referencing then, gets distributed into the water, and you don't exactly capture that. You dredge, and then after you're done dredging, it settles back down. And so that's another reason we've decided to take a second look at is dredging really the right way to do this for the third time or not, or is there another technology that may be more applicable and get us to an end state? So I think that's one hypothesis I've heard that seems to make sense is the water would be disturbed, or the mercury would be disturbed and then resettle after you've done your action, and you're really not getting the bang for your buck there, obviously. So
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And that is what Joel and Matt just said so eloquently is consistent with our understanding, the Army Corps' and AECOM's understanding. I wanted to be very careful with how I said that, because it is, that's how the conceptual site model is being developed. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. Does this AECOM, who got awarded the contract, do they have some alternative technology to dredging that you guys are aware of at this point that's being considered?
Specific to the bay, not that I'm aware of. I'm sure they are considering it, but they have the capabilities to perform a wide variety of remediation technologies. We utilized what's called our unrestricted large business MATOC to look at this particular problem. The reason why we did that is because these large businesses, AECOM is one of a handful of people on this set of contracts. They are a very large business with with a lot of resources, including off-site laboratories. They have research facilities. They are very capable of performing not only the RIFS, but also any kind of remediation strategy that they would propose. They are looking at dredging, and they are looking at other alternatives as part of the contract in the future.
I'm assuming that the other heavy metals, the PCBs that Laura mentioned, are stratified in a similar way, that they're higher at the subsurface, or excuse me, they're higher at the surface level than at the subsurface level?
The question is, if are the other chemicals of concern distributed the same way that mercury is distributed at the site? And that is our current understanding, that it behaves like mercury, cadmium, for instance, behaves like mercury.
I think to repeat the questions anymore, we're able to hear them online most of the time.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Are there any other questions? If you come up with any, feel free to relay them my way. I'm more than happy to answer questions. Thank you. I guess I'll exit out here. Or no, they're PDFs.
Yeah. Okay. Well, no, I think this one's a PowerPoint. So thanks so much, Ryan. So next up on the agenda, we have Meg Hasterot with USGS to give an update on the groundwater flow model report. Let's see if I can find the way to do the slideshow here. Sorry, Meg. Okay, thanks.
Looks like it's maybe same kind of. Well, this will work. Yeah. Hi, I'm Meg with the USGS. I have a bunch of my colleagues in the back here who've been part of a groundwater flow modeling group that we've been working on a groundwater flow and transport model at the site here. Yeah, this will work. So the report for the groundwater flow model portion of this is this. Actually, I got this picture today. The layout just got back to me, and hopefully within the next week or two will be available online. So we'll get that to the Army, and they can probably email you folks the link to that. And as part of that, all of our data and model files will be available online, so anyone can download those. And this report characterizes the groundwater flow system at Badger, things like where's groundwater moving, how's it interacting with the Wisconsin River, how's that flow of groundwater controlling plume movement, that kind of thing. And it's the foundation of the groundwater transport work, which is in progress right now. So I'm going to go through this kind of the background stuff fairly quickly because I know we've presented a lot of this before, but if you have questions, let me know. Feel free to stop me. But what is a groundwater flow model? Technically, it's a bunch of math equations to calculate how water's moving underground. And just like the models that are used to predict weather, it's not right all the time everywhere. But models can be accurate enough that we use them to help us plan for things like, should I bring my rain jacket today? Am I going to get stuck in a snowstorm? Those kind of things. And weather forecasts tend to get more accurate the closer you get to the day that you're forecasting. Similarly, groundwater models have areas that they do better and worse at, and we will try and communicate that information with you. And so what is a groundwater flow model actually? It's a tool that's built to help answer a particular question, so it's not a one-size-fits-all. So we built this thinking about transport of the plumes. And it can be used with other information to help make informed decisions about a groundwater system under conditions that we cannot measure or observe directly. And so there may be other factors that are important in that decision-making process too. And it's a useful but necessarily simplified view of the natural world. And there's a lot of complexity in the natural world, and so that's inherently uncertain. And so we do our best to understand how that uncertainty impacts the model predictions. And so what was the purpose of the groundwater flow model at Badger? So it's a tool to help guide the strategic implementation of remediation efforts at the Badger site, including things like overall plume footprint at a future date with monitored natural attenuation versus bioremediation, thinking about how long bioremediation may need to run to reach a reduction target, and guide the layout of treatment wells for maximum plume reduction. And so what went into the groundwater flow model for Badger? So first of all, we had to decide on a time period. So we ran a transient model from 1984 to 2020, and that was based largely on when we had data available to calibrate that model. And you can see these little steps here. Those are kind of the time jumps that the model takes. So it's year-long jumps for the first portion of that, and quarterly jumps in the more recent period where we had more data available. And then the second thing we had to do is we had to decide on a model area. And so you can see this bigger box here is the area that the model covers in relation to the former Badger Army Ammunition Plant site there. And then if you zoom in there, we divided that area up into all these tiny little grid cells. They're 150 feet by 150 feet, and those cover real areas across the landscape there. And in each little box, we can define certain properties for that box. And then we extend this grid underground to include the underlying geologic units. And I felt a little bit bad about showing a picture with snow in it when we're all trying to be thinking about spring. But this is a picture I took out at Parfrey's Glen, and I liked it because it had nice geologic units there. I'm sure many of you have probably been out to that site there before. And so we extend this beneath the ground and start thinking about the geology of the area. So here you can just see a little cross-section going across the site there, and that upper stuff, the tans and the reds and the oranges, those are unconsolidated glacial material, and then beneath that we have the different bedrock units. So the bottom of the model is the Baraboo quartzite. That's the really pink rock that you see up at Devil's Lake. We assume that groundwater doesn't flow very well through that rock. It's a crystalline rock, so that forms the bottom of our model. And also the Baraboo Hills are inactive in the model because those are made of Baraboo quartzite. And then beneath that we have the Wanawak sandstone, the Eau Claire, and the Mount Simon sandstone. And groundwater will flow differently through these different materials. And so we can assign unique properties to the different layers that represent these different units. So above the bedrock, we have glacial units. And so at the site itself, there's an outwash. This is just an example of outwash. It tends to be more of a coarse material. A lot of the fines have gotten washed out from it. And then toward the east, we have till over outwash, and till tends to be a much coarser material, tends to have, or sorry, a much finer material that has a bunch of different grain sizes mixed together. And so in each of those little model cells, we define properties for these various materials that reflect whether it's fine grained or coarse grained. And then the next thing we had to think about is how water can enter and leave this system, right? And so the biggest input to the system is recharge. That's water that gets in through snow melt or precipitation. And water can leave the system through pumping, through streams, rivers, and wetlands, and those are red and blue because those can be both sources and sinks. And then it can also just leave the area altogether. We call that regional groundwater flow, or come in from regional flow as well. So for groundwater recharge, we ran a separate model for that. That was called a soil water balance model. And that takes a bunch of information about climate, soil characteristics, and land use to come up with an estimate of how much recharge is potentially available to the groundwater system. And so you can see here, all these blues and purples represent different amounts of potential recharge from 0 to 31 inches per year. And those are kind of reflecting some of the different soil types, land use characteristics, and that's how you get that pattern there. And then we allowed the model to interact with various streams, rivers, and wetlands. So we put these in where they actually occurred across the landscape. So you can see Otter Creek there. The Wisconsin River obviously is a big feature in this area. And then all around the edge of the model, we put a flux in from a regional groundwater model that had been done in this area. So that's water that's coming in through those boundaries. And then you can also see how the Baraboo Hills are inactive there. That's why they show up in black there. And then we have pumping for kind of higher capacity wells, things like municipal water supply wells. So then we built this model, so we have the pile of math equations, and we wanted to think about, well, how close is what the model's spitting out? How close is that to reality, right? And so we can use a process called model calibration to compare the outputs of the model to data that have been collected in things like wells and flows through streams. And we can change the model parameters to get a better fit to those observed values. So we can change all those little properties that we define in those little cells to help us better fit what we actually see. So we used the great wealth of data from the well network, as well as some mini piezometers that we installed in the Wisconsin River and some stream flow that we collected along Otter Creek. And then we also considered how well the model can match a history of observations at a well, right? So the model was running from 1984 to 2020, and some of these places we have information at those wells from that full period of time, or at least part of that period of time. And so you can see here that the orange is what the model simulated, the blue is what was observed, and it matches like fairly well. I mean, we miss a few things here and there. And so it gives us confidence about the model's usefulness over a range of, for example, weather conditions. I mean, there's wet years, dry years. Different wells had different performance, and we, in general, for the calibration, emphasize data that were closer to those plumes. So again, that gets into, we built this model really focusing on kind of the plume area. So what do the model results look like? The report has a bunch more information if you want to dig into this anymore. So we're just going to kind of look at kind of a key result here, which is basically how groundwater is flowing at Badger. And so what you can see here are these black lines are contours similar to contours that you'd see on a topo map of like land surface, except these represent the top of the water table. And so water's flowing from high areas to low areas, kind of along where you see these black arrows here. And then the other thing that this map is displaying is the interaction with surface water features. And I know we've talked a lot about the effects of the Prairie to Sac Dam, because that's impounding water, so it's holding it artificially high. So normally, groundwater in these red areas here is coming in, discharging into the Wisconsin River, but you can see that transitions to blue above the Prairie to Sac Dam, and that's where water is actually moving out from the Wisconsin River into the aquifer, and then kind of curling around and discharging just downstream of the dam there. And that kind of matched our conceptual idea at the site, and so that was good. And so thinking a little bit about like all this uncertainty though, right? Because there's a lot of things that we don't know about the subsurface. We typically only have information from just a few wells, relatively speaking, to this kind of larger area that we're trying to model. And so one way of thinking about the uncertainty and kind of what we didn't know can be seen in these plume maps here. So we put imaginary particles into the source areas for the different plumes, and those particles can then move with the groundwater in the model, and they create these paths that you can see here. And we actually ran over 200 versions of the model that had slightly different model parameters, so within an allowable range that we gave it. Because we know, for example, the properties of a typical sand can have kind of a range from a lower to a higher value of things like what we call hydraulic conductivity, which is kind of governs how quickly water can move through material. So we made 200 versions of this model exploring kind of a range of those properties, and these are the paths from all 200 of those. And so we see that they're following kind of the mapped plume paths fairly well. And one thing to note here is this is just where groundwater is moving. It doesn't equal a concentration necessarily, right? Because that's getting into the transport processes, and that's the piece that we'll be adding on as the second part of this. But they do indicate how well the plume shape can be described by groundwater flow. And with that, we're going to move into where we're currently at with transport, and my colleague Nick is actually going to present the last couple slides here.
Yeah, thanks, Meg. So like Meg was saying, I guess the work that she just finished describing was the first phase of the modeling work, and that phase focused on the movement of groundwater at Badger. And so what I'm going to talk about is our second phase of modeling work that we're working on now that focuses on the movement of the contamination at Badger. And so I'm going to just kind of give a quick overview of what we're doing now with the transport modeling. Kind of talk about how we got the transport model together, what we're doing now, and where we're headed. So this figure here is just sort of a simple schematic showing the steps that we've been taking on our transport modeling. We started by collecting all of the information that we need to run our transport simulation. And so this model is builds on the groundwater flow modeling that Meg described and relies on those results really heavily. And so that's one of the big pieces that goes into the transport model is the results from the groundwater flow model. We also gathered all the information we could find about aquifer properties that are relevant to transport. So things like the bulk density of the materials in the aquifer, the different kinds of materials that make up the aquifers. And we also gathered information, historical information about contamination at the site. And we relied pretty heavily on the other USGS report that you probably remember was presented a couple RABs ago about the trends analysis and the different concentrations that are present around the site. So they put together a really great database of historical contamination information that we could use then to build our transport model. And so then the next step is to move bring all of that information together into the model. And so the model is this really useful tool. It's a quantitative framework that can bring all of that information together about the flow system and about the chemistry, and allows us to simulate how that contamination moves through the ground. And like Meg was saying with the flow model, and like all models, the transport model is subject to certain assumptions and simplifications. We have to discretize time and space into chunks, and so there's simplifications that happen there. We don't have perfect data everywhere in the past, so we do our best using the data that we have. But we have a lot of measurements in space and time that we know are true, and we can use those to tie our model back to reality. And so that kind of brings me to the next box, which is calibration. So this is where we are now. We've gathered our data, we've brought it into a model, and now we're working on calibrating that model to tie it to reality. So we have a huge number of measurements of concentrations at wells. The trends report had a variety of things we can also use to compare our model against, things like the center of mass for each plume through time, the spread of each plume. So those are quantitative things that we can use to compare our model against, and see how our model is doing compared to reality. So calibration is sort of an iterative process. We make adjustments to the parameters, see how the model improves, and then go back to the model and continue to make changes so that we can represent reality in the best way that we can with the model. And then so ultimately our goal is to calibrate the model, so we have this calibrated tool that reflects reality well, and use that to make predictions that can help guide decision makings related to remediation at the site. One of the key aspects of the calibration is that it will include the uncertainty in all of those model parameters, so that any prediction that the model makes will have a range of likely outcomes, sort of subject to the uncertainty of the model. So that's useful in decision making as well. This is a diagram kind of building on the last figure that's just meant to kind of show the flows of information into the model and out of the model. The three boxes on top are the inputs to the model. So we have our groundwater flow model, and there's just one of those. And then we have different other inputs of information that vary depending on which contaminant we're simulating. So the model will eventually simulate 2,4-DNT, 2,6-DNT, and TCE. And so different information needs to come into the model for each of those contaminants, but the model can simulate each of those separately. So this is just meant to show kind of the flows of information into and out of the model. This also kind of shows the same thing. It's meant to show where we started and where we're trying to get to from the top to the bottom. So we have our transport model on top, and that will make predictions, and eventually we want to get to the bottom, which are forecasts of interest that will help us make our decisions. So the blue transport model at the top will make predictions about those three COCs, the 2,4-DNT, 2,6, and TCE. But before we can get to that point, we have to go through this calibration step, and that's sort of cyclical. It can take some time. We compare it to real things like the location of the plumes, the center of the plumes, the spread, those sorts of things, observed concentrations at wells. And so that's a process that we're in now, trying to make sure that structurally our model can do a good job of representing reality, and that our parameters help us do that with the model. So then we can get to predictions once we have a calibrated model. We have information about 2,4-DNT, 2,6-DNT, TCE, but that information alone isn't very useful for making decisions, so then we extract information from those predictions to make forecasts about specific things that are relevant to the decisions being made at the site. So for example, the footprints of the plumes that exceed water quality standards, and general plume behavior through time. And we can use that calibrated model and run different scenarios, testing things like natural attenuation scenarios or bioremediation scenarios. And we can compare the results of these forecasts against each other for those two different scenarios to give us an idea of what the effect of different remediation techniques might be with the model. So right now, we're in that phase of calibration, 2023. We've built the model. We're kind of refining it so that we can get good, reliable outcomes. And hopefully by the end of the year, we can get to the point where we're making predictions about the different contaminants in the groundwater system. And then looking ahead in 2024, we're hoping to start running some of those scenarios to evaluate the different remedial methods and potentially optimize the remediation system. So I think that's it for the update about the transport system. So yeah, I think that's it for modeling, so we're happy to take any questions.
I don't have a question, but I think those slides were very helpful. They were great.
Great, thanks. Yeah, Maggie, I don't know if you do have any questions about the groundwater side of things, she can help answer those questions as well. Yeah.
These are wildflowers that I took a picture on a farm to make up for the snow. I showed her earlier.
They're Dutchman's breeches.
They are.
The last slide that you had, just before you came up.
Go back to water flow. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep.
Your particle flow analysis, or whatever it is, it shows that central, or the plume that is skirting down along the river and going into Gruber's Grove, that there's quite a bit of debris, or whatever it is, going off to the right-hand side there toward the river. I've never seen that before. It's always looked like the plume is staying away from the river.
Yeah, so keep in mind that this is not concentration. So this is the groundwater flow paths. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if you were to sample, for example, like you're talking about these areas down here? No, over up here, yeah. Yeah, that you wouldn't necessarily see exceedance or contaminant in those areas. And then the other thing to keep in mind, and this is kind of the cool thing about uncertainty. So this is 200 versions of the model. And so the most probable path, or the most common path that the particles took in those, because these are all stacked, the results from all 200. So the most common path is the yellow part right here. So if you see like in through here, it's slightly, it might be hard to see, this is slightly yellower colored. And then these are like kind of dark blue. So those may have only come up in a couple of those 200 scenarios, for example. So that's saying that the most kind of certain part of where the water is flowing is kind of where the yellow is there. And in a few maybe extreme cases, we see, and that's sort of, again, a reflection of kind of the uncertainty in the system. So we see the majority going through here, and in a few, maybe more extreme values for some of those parameters, we can see a few paths going to the right there.
I'm going to expand on that same area, and because I'd like to see an overlay with where our existing monitoring wells are, but maybe Joel or somebody could answer. They've looked at this more in detail as to whether there are existing monitoring wells to make sure that the plume is not moving in that direction. Because quite honestly, for years and years, we've been told that there is a point of equalization between the water that is fed from the lake, literally an equalization point to that groundwater level that's coming off the Baraboo Hills, and that's what's kept things moving south. Right. And this kind of throws that a little bit into question.
Yes, so in that darker blue area of the central plume towards where Highway 78 and the neighborhoods are, we still have monitoring wells out in the USDA field. So if you're on 78 looking to the west, there are some wells out there and they are clean. So they are in that blue zone and they've been clean. And so we do have a definition going east that the D&T has not migrated, and that the D&T itself does want to get to the south in that greenish yellow zone that she has predicted for that plume.
And those wells that are just south of Inspiration along the fence line there, those are also clean?
Oh yes, on 78 that you can see as you're driving by, yes, those are also clean.
Okay.
And yeah, those continue to be sampled.
modeling this, are you modeling just the groundwater or the bedrock water?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I'll just go back to the cross-section here. There we go. These are bedrock down here, and then this is the water table here, so this blue line. So the bottom of the model is the top of this Baraboo quartzite, so it's this kind of white part down here. So we're modeling down into the Mount Simon sandstone. So we're down a few hundred feet into the bedrock. So that would be groundwater that's both in the bedrock and in the glacial material there.
Okay, what, does the water move from the bedrock to the groundwater or from the groundwater to the bedrock?
So any water basically below this line, it would be considered like groundwater, but are you wondering if it is moving from like the glacial material?
Does the water in the bedrock move to the groundwater, or does it go the other way? Does the groundwater move into the bedrock? Or don't they mix?
There is interaction between like up here, water. I mean,
We've been told, what I'm getting at is we've been told that bedrock wells are safe.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
Is that true? Or does water move from the groundwater to the bedrock, or does it move from bedrock to groundwater?
You're saying, is it kind of going like up or down here? That's a great question. I mean, as far as like where the plumes are at themselves, I don't know as far as is stuff moving up or down. There's definitely not as much exchange between the two.
They've observed very few hits.
Yeah.
In the upper bedrock at below action level, so there's, some exchange there. We know that as we get towards the Wisconsin River, even the heads in the Mount Simon, the deepest unit, indicate the water is moving upwards there. But there can be some downward movement, back away from the river.
Particularly like closer to back over here toward the Baraboo Hills.
There's some exchange, but it seems to be limited. And there's that Eau Claire unit in the middle that has a lot of confining interbedding in it, so it kind of protects the Mount Simon, the deepest unit.
So that's been our assumption for many years, is that there's an aquitard there, a shale and so forth.
Right, that's
the
Claire.
Kind of gray. That has limited any movement down to the bedrock.
Right, to the deepest Mount Simon, that's what appears.
And it's not continuous throughout the whole area, but under the plumes, it pretty much is.
Yeah.
And we do have in the model, Nick mentioned that some of the things we're going to look at to target are things like the footprint of the plumes. Some of the things we're also specifically looking at in this calibration and in the future are whether the contaminants are getting to the bedrock or not. So we have those bedrock layers sort of separated out, and we're looking at them specifically.
There's quite a bit of new development going along the lake right now, and if some of these well drillers aren't familiar with the area, are they getting all the way to bedrock or not? And has anybody been telling them to, or, it's kind of concerning to me that all these new wells are going in, and, the old well drillers they always knew to go to bedrock, but some of these guys don't.
Hey, Meg, I wanted to follow up. I think what he was trying to figure out is your flow model was saying horizontally, this is the direction of the water. Sure. Does the model tell you the water from the surface of the water table, is that penetrating into the bedrock, or is the water that's in the bedrock moving vertically up? Is that something that the model is using as a parameter?
It does look at vertical flow within the aquifer too, basically in this whole area, this wedge of material that we have. So it looks at, is water moving kind of laterally as well as like up and down. We don't have a graphic of that here today, but it is something that it computes, yes.
The particle tracks that Meg showed the map view of, those particles are moving they can move down. And we counted for all those different combinations, how many times did a particle reach the bedrock? And it didn't reach the bedrock in the central or DVG plumes. And in the PVG plumes, very few particles reached into the bedrock with some combinations. And we purposely didn't want the model to totally ignore it, because that's going to affect how well the cleanup will go. If materials move down to the bedrock, it's going to be harder to clean up. So we kind of want to have at least some combinations, estimate stuff going to the bedrock, so that when you do a cleanup scenario, we say, well, you know, is that really going to affect the cleanup a lot, or is it going to be the cleanup going to be more robust? So we're trying to track that, because we're really aware that that could be a problem. But we always want to go back to Joel's data set and say, you know, this is within our uncertainty. What are you seeing in the field? And yeah, we may have gotten a hit here, but it was below levels, or we never got a hit here, or
No, that's very helpful, because the same idea of then you put the contaminants in there, and the contaminants can do different things than the regular water flow too. So
we want to make sure that we're not being too restrictive, that we predetermine the solution down the road by saying from the beginning, well, we know the material's not moving down there, so we're not even going to check. We'll say is, let's let the material move down there if it wants to, and then go back and look at the data and say, well, is this consistent with the data, or is this not following it, and it's less likely?
And just a comment to kind of get to your question too, and it's a valid question with the recent development in well drillers there. We do have information for well drillers. We have a well driller viewer that's available for those types of companies. And then on top of that, we also have all of our remediation redevelopment program information. That's all available publicly online as well. And then if there are concerns for any future developments, new neighbors, anything like that, always feel free to give out our contact information. We have a drinking water program that's split primarily into private drinking water wells, which is applicable to this and applicable to the well viewer, as well as our municipal side of that program too. So those resources are available. Well drillers should be fairly aware of those resources too.
I'll just share something, because I've talked with the developer out there about this issue. And what he said, because I asked him, is he going to take the community well approach, in other words, drill into the bedrock and, you know, put 100 different residences on one well? He says, no, he's not going to do that. I asked him if he's going to promote joint well approach. He said, no, it's going to be up to the individual property owners. So I said, how deep do you think they're going to go? And he said, it's same as Lakeview Estates. This is called Phase 1 of Lake Stone Estates, is the area we're talking about. Lakeview Estates, generally the wells are 110 to 190 feet, so they're not deep wells. But they've been clean, although just on the other side of Wiggins, there's been some issues. So it's kind of marginal right there, but his approach is it's going to be up to the individual landowner.
Yeah, and that's not good.
Just out of curiosity, are well drillers held to some county or state standard?
I'd have to check in with our drinking water program, but I can definitely follow up with that. We're just doing the R&R program, so I can look into those regulations and see what that would be, but I would have to imagine. Yeah.
Well, just a comment on that. I've got that, it's an old CD of all the wells in our area, and their depths and who drilled them and all this kind of stuff. They're all over the board. I'm in the windings. To get into bedrock by us, it has to be 250 foot or more deep. There are some of our wells up there are only 150, some are less than that.
Yeah, and that'll definitely vary depending on the age of the well that has been constructed too.
Well, these are all within the last 40 years, but it depends on the well driller.
Yep.
They aren't familiar with the area, they don't go as deep. They go to a good supply, a large enough supply, and That's it.
Yep.
So is Lakestone Estate, is that town of Merrimack?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe Roger, that's something to bring back to your board? Make them aware?
Okay.
So I will say that the experience we've had is that in that area, bedrock wells do very poorly unless they're at a very deep depth. And so the water quality itself can be very irony and poor if you get into the bedrock. So I know that I've talked to one of the drillers and they want a good sand well that gives good production, it's cheaper, and doesn't create any issues inside the home. So other people do have other issues when they go 300 or 350 feet deep. So that's one of the concerns that some of these guys have.
Well, we do have iron. We're in bedrock. We do have iron.
Yes. Yes.
Any other questions? All right, well, we're running a bit long here, so we'll wrap up briefly. Go back to slide. So while we had a moment, I wanted to introduce Mr. Dwight Holland. I introduced him last time. So if you remember Brian Lynch, he was our environmental support manager for Badger Army Ammunition Plant. So Dwight has taken, we've hired Dwight last November to take Brian's spot. So I wanted to let him talk a little bit about his background real quick, and then we'll talk about future meetings and then conclude the night. So.
Well, I'd like to say howdy to everybody. As y'all might tell by my accent, I'm not from around here. So I'm from southern Wisconsin. No. Actually, I was born and raised in eastern Kentucky, and so I went to school at Texas A&M University. I've got well over 35 years of experience in groundwater and environmental work as well as oil and gas. And so I've worked at Oak Ridge National Lab, the Oak Ridge Reservation, doing a lot of work there, environmental work for all the contaminants they have, and they've got radioactive components as part of the weapons complex. And I've worked at the Nevada test site. I've worked there doing underground mapping for weapons testing. That was an interesting job. And then, of course, and I recently just worked at Los Alamos National Lab when I came here to work for AEC, working there as an environmental manager for the environmental restoration program there at Los Alamos National Lab and its places. So, and I've had years of experience. Worked at Anniston, Alabama, there with the Army, and did a lot of groundwater wells, a lot of soil sampling, and those. I've got about half of my career has been working in the oil and gas industry. So I've got a lot of technical experience as well as managing a lot of projects. So many things, what they're talking about, the modeling that the USGS did and all the work that has been done at Badger has been very good technically. From a technical standpoint, it's been very good. And it's not an easy place to do once you get contaminants in your groundwater. It's sort of tough to remediate, but it can be done. And in particular, an example, an analog to your question about the bioremediation, biochemical work, I'm also a site manager at Cornhusker, and they have a very successful program there. It is actually cleaned up by applying their mix of bioremediation chemicals to clean up that. They had a plume there of RDX and TNT, and so it does work. So using that as an analog for here at Badger, similar sediments, glacial sediments and such, there's a good chance it'll work, and that's part of the proposed plan. So I want to introduce myself to you. Look forward to working with y'all and answering some of these questions. Y'all ask a lot of tough questions. I might just have to punt, but anyway. Anyway, I appreciate y'all's time. I look forward to working with you.
So if you look at the slides that were sent out, at the bottom is Dwight's name and contact information and email. So feel free to reach out to Dwight anytime or myself. I appreciate that, having Dwight on the team. So real quickly on future meetings, so nothing's changed here except for the top date. So July 27th is actually a week later than what we've been proposing. So we've been targeting the fourth Thursday of the month. We have an internal conflict at that time, so wanted to propose a shift by 1 week on that date for the next RAB. So any issues with that, and if you have issues and we need to relook other dates, certainly we've got some time there, so you could reach out. I know it's putting you on the spot here, but we're targeting July 27th, which is a Thursday. It would be the 5th Thursday in July instead of the 4th, right? Or maybe it's the 4th instead of the 3rd. I'm sorry, but that.
Clients, all our meetings our board meetings are every 4th Thursday of the month. So it always is a conflict for me. You guys have something on the 4th Thursday?
Okay. So would shift into a Wednesday? Okay, I know we have church services and things on Wednesday evenings, and we try to avoid that. Or even a Tuesday evening, that would work better. Again, we'll try to accommodate the majority of folks. If that Thursday does not work well. What's the general feel for like Wednesday evening? Is that out of the question? I know some RABs, got church services on Wednesday evenings, but
we used to do some on Wednesdays.
Okay, maybe we can.
Typically, they're bad for me, but during the summer, they're okay.
They're okay in the summer. Okay, so maybe for this week we can look at Wednesday the 26th, and we'll go ahead and pencil that in for our July RAB meeting. So it'll be a little bit different, but we'll make sure and get the notice out well ahead of time. But we'll move forward with that unless we hear anything in the next couple of weeks. So what's preferable? We shifted, I know we've been meeting at 5 to do the operating procedures. We heard some folks had trouble getting here by 6, so we made this one 6:30. We're here to accommodate. It really doesn't matter to us. So is 6 better? Is 6:30 better? I know it gets late in the evening when we start later, but any preferences?
If we start later, it would be good to put a firm ending time on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We hit 8 o'clock, we're done.
Yeah, I know, it's tough. So is 6 okay? I mean, yeah, I mean, I've not been to one yet that's been less than 2 hours in the last year that I've been involved. So certainly they do tend to, take some time. So is 6 o'clock generally okay? I'm not seeing anybody say no. Okay, so 6 o'clock is what we'll target for start times. That gives everybody a chance to get a bite to eat after work and head here. So with that, yes, sir.
This every time, the last 2 times, but I'm serious this time. We are going to have a public meeting scheduled for May 1st to talk about the new research dairy. It will be at the library, Sauk-Prairie Library. So May 1st, I believe it is 5:30 to 7:30. I think that's because the library closes at 8, so we have to be out by.
Which library is it?
The Sauk-City Library.
George Culver.
The George Culver.
Do you know if there'll be call-in options or digital options similar to this for that?
We do have plans to do it as a Zoom.
Okay.
What was the subject of this?
The new research area that we're building at Badger. No donuts, I'm sorry.
No?
We can't even give away fresh milk.
Oh, you guys are? Or are you bringing the brick?
Roger, you're bringing
Okay, do we have any other comments or questions from online or here in the room before we call it an evening? Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate your attendance tonight and look forward to seeing you in July. Please reach out if you have any questions or concerns.